So what's next? That's what we usually talk about here. I think that's what we're officially supposed to talk about. What's next? We can say that some pull requests have already been created for the next release because some of us are busy in the back row. I don't know if you want to give any predictions or. Yeah.
So in my short presentation, I talked about some improvements that will be made to some things. I've sort of added a few of those. During this afternoon, I implemented the validate subcommand because I thought that would be a good idea. I haven't done any other implementations yet.
The extension points between the map first and topic next.
Oh yeah, and then I added the extension points that were sort of missing from Robert's use case. So sometimes you're able to produce a lot in a short amount of time. It also means that I've added multiple bugs while doing this, because of course I've been listening to the presenters also.
This also means that if you're thinking ahead to next year and you have some probably small feature requests, but you're not quite sure how to accomplish it, give a presentation where it would be a lot easier if this happened. And perhaps by the time this session rolls around again, it will be done.
Yes. So the title is Future Plans, but I don't know if we once again have plans. Things just grow organically.
I will say, somewhat on that note, something that we wanted to mention. One thing that's really cool about this release and that I would love to see more of for the next one is that it's not just the three of us doing the coding. Mm-hmm. We've had more contributions. I don't think Chris Papadimitrios ever had any chance of making it here to this show.
Allentown, Pennsylvania is far away.
Yeah, it's a bit of a drive.
Yeah.
But yeah, he made quite a few pull requests that we managed to get into this release, which is awesome, and we love to see that. We've also, I think, had an increasing number of people throughout the year on our monthly contributor calls, which if anybody wants to join, contact me and we can add you. A number of people call and just kind of listen, so it's just kind of keeping tabs on what we're up to. But it's a monthly call, and yeah, participation has been growing there as well, which is great to see.
Yeah, I'd like to really encourage people to join that call, and lurking is explicitly allowed, right? Because then you understand what are we working on, how are we thinking about it, how are we talking about it. I participated in those calls for several months before I had the courage to speak up and say anything at all. But it did help me to understand how the project works, and it encouraged me, wow, they really do need help, and there's a question I even know the answer to. So, yeah.
Do you have any questions for us? I asked that to start with, which was not quite so serious, but now more seriously. Do you have questions while you have us here? Uh-oh, Elliot. It was not meant for you, Elliot.
Okay, now we need a microphone.
Yeah, good.
Yeah. I give away the microphone, they have to answer.
That's number one.
So, I mean, this is a very forward-looking question, but we're on the early days of version 4. Are you thinking about some, more interesting change for version 5? Like, because, Yarno always has ideas.
I have a bunch of ideas. I don't have time to implement them, and that's unfortunate. We try and not break backwards compatibility. We try and not introduce bugs. We fail at both. But right now we don't have any new, really novel things to implement, because in a way, Open Toolkit has been a working product for or since like 15 years ago already. So we're just adding new functionality, but oftentimes they're small incremental changes. Even though the switch over to map-first preprocessing was a really small change, if you look at the code, that was probably one of the biggest things that we've done. And we currently don't have anything close to that on the radar. I do have an Epic branch for incremental publishing, but that's so complex that it'll take me a while to get my head around it. And if I ever get it working, it will still come with some, this works except if you do this. So you have to sort of opt into it. And that's sort of one decision you have to make with implementing features. Are they opt-in or opt-out features? But I don't have any grand plans right now. I may have tomorrow, or if you can come up with something that's implementable, do just keep shouting out and someone will keep a record.
Be careful telling this crowd to shout. They've been doing it all day.
Only one shot.
Oh, okay. Watch out for him. Was there anything else on our list of things we needed to?
No, I was just thinking of things that, yeah, Jarno had talked about maybe considering. I think you had some more ideas about further improvements to the command line experience. I've heard you talk about packaging things up into a jar file in different ways. I don't know what some of those words mean, but I hear you say them now and then. So maybe that's one area for further improvement. We've been thinking that, since it's a command line tool, the experience of using the tool on the command line should be better. And so that's where, some of the message improvements came from this time around. And I think, we kind of ran out of time to implement some of the ideas that we had there. So I would say there's probably more coming in that area, right?
So, like you said, Open Toolkit is a command line tool, but it also has an API, and you can call it through Ant still. And I thought that if we gave people gave people an API to call from Java, people would start to use it to call Open Toolkit. But it seems that everyone's just using the command line. If you run it through Jenkins, you don't have this magic integration. Instead, you just call the DITA command. And that's kind of a disappointment. Please do something else. Just because it would be fun to hear about those things. But of course, if the command line works, then wonderful. Let's keep on using that. But the command line experience can be made better. And for that, I'm using Roger to make the copy better and try and improve the, for example, error messages. And one thing that would be really nice to do is make the error messages even better, so it would sort of explain a bit more what's going on. Might be helpful for beginners, but that would require a lot of your time. Yeah. And then, of course, the idea of packaging it as a jar. So instead of needing to expand some zip file in addition to the jar file, that would be wonderful. A single jar file, except I can't do it because of Ant. So when I replace Ant, I'll be able to do it. In order to replace Ant, I would probably have to write an emulator for Ant, so I wouldn't need to rely on Ant anymore. And I don't want to write an Ant emulator, even though it would be wonderful as a technical challenge. I don't have that many evenings to work on it.
I think another thing that's likely to
There's a question.
come. Oh, okay.
First of all, thanks guys for DITA-OT. My small addition to your previous idea where you wanted me to throw some ideas to explore. One thing is we use very big books, huge books, like each DITA map will have 500, 400 topics in it. So maybe it's worth considering improving the speed of the publishing.
That's a classic. So we added parallel processing. You can opt into that. Sometimes it makes it faster. We added in-memory processing, which makes it faster. but it doesn't help you if you have a gazillion files. So if you have gazillion files, it will take a long time. To solve that, you'd need incremental processing. So just keep the previous result and only republish the things that have changed. Except that's a really complex problem because it's basically cache invalidation. So that's, I've done off by one error, now cache invalidation. So I just need one more with difficult naming.
The third thing is naming, right?
Yeah.
And the only thing harder than naming is renaming things.
Mm.
So pre-process 2.
Yeah, pre-process 2. We used to always talk about pre-process 2, then we realized it's not really approachable name, so now it's map first pre-processing with 2 hyphens. And I got really not frustrated, but tired of saying map first pre-processing during my talk. So let's not say it ever again. Let's just abbreviate it to pre-process 2. And then there's another term we'd like to replace with output format, probably, or just output.
Yeah. I think we through the documentation we've probably largely eradicated the term trans type, but in some cases there are instances of it because it's still there in ANT and things like that. So we've tried to spell that out as transformation type where it's helpful, or output format or something like that. But yeah, if you see instances of that word, let us know. We're trying to replace that word.
Question to Roger, actually. Given that the error messaging has been improved, is there a style guide for plugin maintainers to actually make their error messages more standards compliant?
Not yet, but that's a very good idea. We have, at the moment, just a very rudimentary set of rules in the documentation wiki, where we've just written down in a bulleted list the way we would like to do certain things. That's not at all enforced, and were this my day job, that would certainly be one of the things on the list, would be to automate that. In an XML world, we would probably do that with Schematron. We could do that with Veil or other things that say, hey, this text that you're proposing breaks one or two of our style guide rules. So that's certainly an interesting challenge, let's say, or an interesting thing to do, and that might be an exercise that someone might find fun and put some time into on a few evenings or a few weekends. I can think of a few people that might actually appreciate tasks like that, but I won't name anyone because maybe they won't find it as interesting as I thought. None of them are sitting here. But no, I can think of a few people that might be interested in implementing something like that because they do it at work. And that is basically the pitch to the room, is some of you do this sort of thing at your day jobs. And if you're good at that sort of stuff and have ideas like that we could apply to the toolkit, these kinds of contributions are very welcome. So if anyone is messing around with Schematron rules at work and says, hey, they have 3 rules in their style guide in the wiki, let's implement them in the form of some Schematron checks that they can run. Why not, right? Or a Veil compatible dictionary of approved terms and deprecated terms and things like that. Those are things that we could implement. So good idea, Jason, and I agree that would help. I think it's kind of a new problem in the sense that because the toolkit's messages themselves weren't particularly consistent up until now, it wasn't something that was likely to create much irritation or friction when a plugin did not adhere to the sort of consistent standard. And they're still not super consistent yet, but we're converging on consistency, let's say. So yeah, as we develop those ideas of what we think an error message should look like, then of course it makes sense to implement those as rules or recommendations. So yeah, good idea. Let's keep that idea in mind and see about how we might implement something like that. So I like that idea. And when I implement this kind of style guide for clients or in a day job, it typically starts with just deciding which rules you want to follow, right? And then you write them down somewhere. And then no one looks at the place where you wrote it down. And so you realize that writing down the rules isn't enough. you need to somehow integrate those rules into the authoring environment so that when people are doing something, they don't need to be aware of the rules. The tools tell them, actually, there are rules and you're not following them. So here's the suggestion. So it's kind of a multi-step process, but even just writing down what the rules are is a good start. And then after that, take some time to automate it. So good idea. Thank you for that. And volunteers, welcome.
So Roger,
Yes.
you guys use Oxygen to author this documentation?
Excuse me?
Do you use Oxygen? Sorry. Do you use Oxygen to author this documentation?
I would be a heretic if I were to answer anything else. There's, I don't know the equivalent English or Finnish expression, but for the Germans in the room, there's a saying that says, "Wes Brot ist des Lied ich sing." So if I'm eating your bread, I'm going to
Eat your own dog food.
eat your own dog food. Maybe that. No, it's actually about someone else's dog food.
No,
They have
true.
provided the dog food. So no, of course, but no, I do use Oxygen to edit the documentation for the toolkit. I don't need to lie or pretend that's true. There's an Oxygen project file in the documentation repository that contains some of the settings that we use. And Leif Erikson has implemented some of the guidance that we want to follow within that Oxygen project. So that's an area where we could probably do a little bit more. Is implement some of that, some of those checks in there. Now that said, there are certain cases where we might manipulate those files outside of Oxygen, right? Some of us use different editors. We might not have a copy of Oxygen at work, but we still want to edit the files or something like that. So, there's always those cases where one might use something else, but we do use Oxygen as well. Is that the right answer, Rada? Yes, Justina.
So could you identify the areas where you would need the contributions from other people, or what would be the skills? What could people contribute if they wanted?
Thank you. I see that sitting next to John has already rubbed off on you. That's usually the question that John asks. But no, thank you. That's a very welcome question, of course. Both for the documentation and the toolkit, in the core toolkit, I think the answer is pretty much the same. Let us know if you find something that doesn't look right. So even just filing bugs helps us, because sometimes we don't know the things that are breaking on your side, right? The things you don't understand when you read the documentation, the missing parameter that you discovered isn't listed there, although it should be, the thing that doesn't work like it says it does. So, I think that's the first step, is to just let us know when something doesn't work for you, even if you don't know how to fix it. Just knowing that is already helpful, because sometimes we can say, oh, yeah, we forgot that. We should just add that. And it's
doesn't happen.
5 minutes of work sometimes, and it's already fixed, right? So that's super easy. Sometimes it's hard when you identify something that's broken, and we're like, oh, okay, that one's gonna take longer, but still helps to know. So filing issues, following along with the lists of open issues and things like that. For those of you that use distributed version control for your day jobs and spend some time logged into GitHub or something like that, you might want to watch the repository and see, which issues are filed. Maybe you see someone file an issue and say, hey, I know the answer to that one. So, members of the community that answer questions before we get to answer them are also quite welcome, because that saves us some communication work.
Yeah, not just in the issues, but in the discussion forum as well. Yeah.
And that's one thing that we wanted to mention too, that there have been over the years multiple different channels for discussing about how to use DITA, how to use DITA Open Toolkit, things like that. We had multiple mailing lists. There were Yahoo lists. They became Google groups. Google groups are awkward for other reasons. So we had Slack for a while. That was rather active, but then Slack sort of pivoted a bit. Once they had a certain degree of adoption, they started locking down the free plans that we're on. And so Slack now only maintains, I believe it's something like 90 days of history or something like that. So basically any smart discussions that happen about things toolkit in Slack are lost to the wind. So we're trying to move those discussions to a more permanent forum. GitHub discussions is one place where that happens, because all of those discussions have a public link.
for now, that is the permanent location.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Check again next year.
Right. Belongs to Microsoft, of course. Who knows what they will do with it? They're training their AI on it, I'm sure. So there's that. Follow along in those community discussions and contribute there. And if you not only identify a bug but know how to fix it, and are comfortable enough with Git and GitHub and things like that, then we're really happy when we receive pull requests with change proposals to say, hey, not only did I see that something is wrong, but I also have a suggestion for how to fix it. And yes, that sometimes requires a little bit of effort on our part to review that and say, well, okay, you have a fix. It's not quite the same way that we would do it, and it might take a little bit of time for us to review that and maybe propose some changes to the changes that you've proposed. But it's still helpful for us to see an actual suggestion of like how to change things. But if you don't know how to fix it, that's no reason not to report it, right? And many of you work for companies that embed the toolkit or use it. And on these slides, every year we patch the toolkit to do X, right? We very seldom receive those contributions, right? And so if someone at your company is being paid to work around issues that you find in the toolkit and you're not telling us, I suppose I understand that, because then your competitors don't get that knowledge, and then you're the only one that does it that way. But I think that in the spirit of open source, if you're using an open source product and you find a deficiency and you fix it for your own use, it would be really, really cool to the community if you could share that with others.
Also, a couple of years down the road, those become the roadblocks to upgrading, because you're trying to maintain these patches. And you may have patched 3 or 4 things, but now you can't upgrade to the next release because you don't know how to upgrade your patch. And it just becomes another bit of that technical debt that you carry along that makes it too hard to move.
Yeah, and that developer at your company that spent a week implementing that patch or whatever, when she leaves, you're going to have to migrate that to the next version of the toolkit. If you contribute that patch to the next version of the toolkit, then you don't even need to migrate that patch when she leaves, because it'll already be in the toolkit, right? So that's you may even profit from it yourself that way. So that's definitely a good thing.
That's a way to avoid becoming another stat on Eric's slide next year. Oh, they're on that version of the toolkit, right?
So I recognize the problem. You're on version something old. You patch it, but we don't really accept patches to really old versions because we don't release those. So I understand that maybe this approach will not work for you, because there's no point in you patching it in the latest version, because you won't move to that until 6 years from now. So it's not always that easy. And then there are some companies that have a lot of lawyers who think everything should be sort of locked down and you can't contribute anything outside the company, and they own everything you do. Those exist, and that's a problem. But if you're on more or less the latest version and you find a bug, you're able to fix it, please contribute. Some of us are sort of terse in our communication, but we still appreciate your help a lot.
I have a remark. There is a feedback form in front of you, so you can also give us feedback for the conference or to the DITA-OT developers using that feedback form that you have on the table. If not, we'll use the feedback form for the next year.
Yes.
If you leave it empty. One more thing, one useful feature maybe the DITA-OT will be maybe support for sub-project or sub-modules. Like in software development, we have a large project and we split it in sub-modules, and we work on small parts, and each part is its own project, and each project depends on other projects and so on. So then I have a project for each chapter in my DITA map, and for each chapter I produce like an artifact on Maven, like a zip, and then in my larger DITA map I just assemble those sub-projects. I say my larger DITA map depends on these artifacts for each chapter, and somehow the DITA-OT, when you publish, brings all the zips for the submaps and unzips them and makes the DITA map complete and publishes. But the Git project for the main DITA map is very small because it just has dependencies to other projects for each chapter, for example. So if I work on a certain chapter, I just check out the project, the Git project for that chapter.
This sounds to me very much like Antora, the static site generator for the ASCII doc community, and they have a repository that contains a single playbook file. That's their convention, and they assume that you will go to 10 other repositories to get your actual source codes. It's an interesting idea.
It's copied from software development, like
Right.
most ideas. They're copied from one place to the other.
Yeah, because we don't really invent new things, we just copy other people. Like most of the cool new features in Open Toolkit have been copied from someone else. And we just do it in our own way. So also if you have ideas from similar projects, and they don't always necessarily have to be in documentation tools like Pandoc. Pandoc probably has some really good ideas that we could just steal and copy, or steal or copy. But if there are tools that do something really, really well, and something similar could be added to Open Toolkit, some approach or convention, please let us know.
Should probably also mention that there will probably, over time, be a little bit more support for the DITA 2.0 features. We are actually remarkably close to caught up with what the 2.0 draft is doing. There's not a lot of new features there. A lot of what is new has been implemented already. There are a few things that haven't. I will be talking more about that tomorrow, but feel free to chat with me. These days I represent the spec more so than the toolkit most of the time that I'm talking. So, but probably more of that coming.
Other questions from the room?
Okay, drop the mic.
2 minutes left.
I've been told to drop the mic, but that doesn't seem like a very Finnish thing to do. Well, thank you for coming.
Thanks.